Hello, boys and girls. My name is Miss Keating, and today I'm going to share with you about the US Constitution, what it is, how and why it came into being. So let's start. US Constitution. We're going to take a look at life after the American War, Revolutionary War, writing the Constitution, debating the Constitution, and explaining the Constitution. And we're also going to take a closer look at what it is. The Constitution, what is it? Why did our founding fathers write it? And why is it important to me or us 200 years later? Today, the United States consists of 50 different states. Each state is represented as a star on the American flag. However, America did not always have 50 states, but rather 13 colonies. Let's travel back in time to America to find out how these states came into being. European explorers first traveled to America around the year 1000. About 500 years later, Christopher Columbus landed in the New World. Soon, people from England, France, and Spain began making claims to the land and settling in North America. There were people who already lived on the land that the colonists arrived to. This land belonged to them. However, over time, they got pushed off their lands. Many were killed, forced into slavery, or died due to diseases that the Europeans brought with them, such as smallpox, measles, typhus, and cholera. These people became known as Native Americans to the colonists. In 1607, English people moved to what is now known as Virginia. They moved there because they wanted a better quality of life. Some were being persecuted and wanted freedom to practice their own religion. Over the next 100 years, European settlers founded all the 13 colonies along the east coast of North America. The colonies were English territories established during the 16 to the 1700s. Over time, other people from Sweden, Germany, Netherlands, and Switzerland came. How did the colonies become the United States of America? The colonists had to pay taxes to the British government, and they could not choose their own leaders. They decided to separate from Great Britain and establish their own independent government. In 1775, fighting broke out between the colonists and the British soldiers, and the American Revolution began, which they won. In 1776, Americans declared independence from Britain. The main author of the Declaration of Independence was a man named Thomas Jefferson. He, along with Benjamin Franklin and John Adams, for 17 days wrote what this document wished to achieve: the colonists' independence from Britain. The Declaration of Independence explains why the 13 colonies were forming a new country, the United States of America. The Declaration of Independence was signed on July 26, 1776 in Independence Hall, Philadelphia. The original document can today be found in the National Archives Museum in Washington, D.C. On July 4th, 1776, the Continental Congress formally adopted the Declaration of Independence. This is why each year Americans celebrate the 4th of July in honor of attaining independence from Britain. The war between Americans and British ended in 1781. Later in 1787, the US Constitution was written and signed. 13 colonies became the United States of America. Let's learn how this occurred. Life after the American Revolutionary War. After Americans rose up against the British and won their independence, the American Revolutionary War happened because the British King III and his government were not fair to the people of the 13 colonies. When the American Revolutionary War ended, Americans had to figure out a better way to govern themselves. After the amazing defeat of the British Army by the Americans, the colonies were at risk of falling apart. They had no government that could unify the states. This crisis spurred people to create a brand new national government in which the people would decide a better way to govern themselves. It was a difficult task. This idea of creating a new government under a new written constitution faced much opposition because people feared that a central government set above the people, the individual states, might bully the people as much as the English king had. But ultimately, those in favour of a strong federal government, the Federalists, won over most of the voters. The Constitution that they wrote still structures our lives in the United States. The years of fighting the British had been hard. While the men were at war, the women and children had been left behind to carry on. After the war, many families were poorer than they had been before. This made some people angry and upset. Leaders were needed to show that if people from all 13 states worked together, America could become a strong country. Questions. From whom did the Americans win their independence? Americans won their independence from the British. What did the Americans have to figure out after the American Revolutionary War ended? They needed to figure out a better way to govern themselves. Why was creating a new government difficult? Creating a new government was difficult because some people did not agree on how much power the government was to have. Writing the Constitution. In May of 1787, James Madison of Virginia traveled to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, to meet with leaders from most of the other 13 states. George Washington, Alexander Hamilton, and Benjamin Franklin, they wanted to figure out a new American government, how it would work, and what powers it would have. We call this meeting in Philadelphia the Constitutional Convention, which was held in Independence Hall. These are some of the men that went to the Constitution Convention: George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, and James Madison, some of the leaders from the 13 colonies who were at the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia in 1787. The leaders at the meeting decided to keep their talks a secret. They met in a room known as Independence Hall and nailed the windows shut. They did this because they didn't want others to find out what they were discussing until they'd made their minds up about what they needed to do. The leaders didn't always agree with one another. Some of the men at the convention did not want to give one person, the president, too much power. In the end, each leader had to compromise, except that they would not get exactly what they wanted. Finally, on September 17, 1787, the state leaders finished their work and signed what they call the U.S. Constitution, a plan for a new system of government. What is a constitution? A constitution is a set of laws that tells how a country should be governed, what leaders there should be, how they should be chosen, and what their responsibilities are. They are written. They are approved by the people of the country. Usually they're written by delegates who represent the people of that country. They can only be changed by the people, and they must include a list of things that the leaders of the government must do. For example, defend the country, issue money, or settle legal disputes, and specify how to choose their leaders. They contain a list of things that the government may not do, for example, violate citizens' rights. The Constitution is considered to be the highest law in the land. Every other law is supposed to follow and respect the Constitution. Government leaders are called to follow the Constitution and make sure that no laws are passed that go against what is written in the Constitution. The Constitution is the law that all other laws are supposed to support and follow. Constitutions were an American invention. The idea of a written constitution approved by the people was developed by American colonists during the difficult years of their struggle for independence from Britain. Americans wanted independence from Britain as they felt that the British government was abusing its power. American colonial leaders came to believe that a written constitution would serve as a safeguard against a government abusing its power, as the British government had done to them. They wanted to create a new kind of government based on the will of the people. Americans were aware that they were doing something no people in history had done before. They were creating their own government based not on tradition, but on reason. We the people. The first three words of the Constitution are we the people. This means that the US government was founded for the people, by the people. The government gets its power to make laws from the people, not from a king or president. The reason the colonists fought for independence from Great Britain was to get liberty and freedom for the people. The US Constitution works to protect the people and their rights. The United States has a representative democracy. Democracy means run by the people. So, the US Constitution is a special document written in 1787. It is a written plan for how the US government is supposed to work. Government. What is the purpose of a government? The US government exists for the people and by the people. It enforces laws, settles disputes, and protects people's rights and liberties. A government's basic functions are providing leadership, maintaining order, providing public services such as healthcare, education, transportation, providing national security, providing economic security and assistance. The six main goals of the American government, as indicated by the preamble in the US Constitution, are: number one, form a more perfect union. Number two, establish justice. Number three, ensure domestic tranquility. Number four, provide for the common defense. 5, promote the general welfare. And 6, secure the blessings of liberty. Thomas Jefferson said, the purpose of government is to enable the people of a nation to live in safety and happiness. Government exists for the interests of the governed, not for the governors. To ensure a separation of powers, the US federal government is made up of 3 branches: legislative, executive, and judicial. To ensure the government is effective and citizens' rights are protected, each branch has its own powers and responsibilities, including working with the other branches. There are 3 branches of government. Legislative branch makes the laws, and they are called the Senate and the House of Representatives. The judicial branch ensures that the justice is carried out and oversees the court system. The executive branch evaluates the laws. The president oversees this branch as well as the vice president. Each branch of government governs one another through a check and balance system. Questions. Who were some of the leaders that traveled to meet in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania? James Madison, George Washington, and Benjamin Franklin. Why was the creation of the US Constitution important? The creation of the Constitution was important because it meant that the new country now had a plan for the new American government. What was the meeting to draft the US Constitution called? The meeting was called the Constitutional Convention, and it was held in 1787 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, in Independence Hall. Who is known as the father of the Constitution? James Madison is known as the father of the Constitution because of the work he put into creating the document. Who are the founding fathers? The founding fathers are those responsible for writing the Constitution: James Madison, Thomas Jefferson, and Benjamin Franklin. How do the 3 branches of government govern one another? The 3 branches of government govern one another through a check and balance system. What is democracy? It's to be run by the people through delegates. Delegate is a person chosen by the people to vote or act for others. She or he represents the people. debating the Constitution. Each state had to decide if it would approve the Constitution. This meant that the people in each state had to figure out for themselves if they thought the Constitution was a good idea. The new American government could only begin if at least 9 of the 13 states voted yes for the Constitution. Today, it might be hard to imagine that anyone was against the Constitution, but some of the most famous Americans of the Revolutionary War were worried. Patrick Henry of Virginia, who once said, "Give me liberty or give me death," thought the new Constitution gave too much power to the national government. Rights and freedoms. One big worry was that the Constitution itself did not list the rights and freedoms that all Americans should have. Some people wanted a Bill of Rights attached to the Constitution. A Bill of Rights would make it clear that every American had the liberty, the freedom of religion, freedom of speech. It was also important that the newspapers or the press had the freedom they needed to do their job. Unification of the 13 states. The people who supported the Constitution were sure that it would make things better if America remained 13 separate states. The states would soon be gobbled up by other countries in war or by disagreements with one another. Only by acting together as one United States under the Constitution could they last. Questions. What was needed for the Constitution to be approved so that the new government could begin? At least 9 of the 13 states had to vote yes to approve the Constitution. Why were some Americans against the Constitution? They were afraid that the new Constitution gave too much power to the national government. Explaining the Constitution. James Madison and 2 other men, John Jay and Alexander Hamilton, were sure that if Americans really understood the Constitution, how it worked, and what it was supposed to do, they would realize that it was good and would vote for it. So they decided to teach people about the Constitution in a series of newspaper articles. They ended up writing more than 80 articles. These articles were soon made into a book called the Federalist Papers. The 3 men explained in the articles that the president couldn't become as powerful as a king. First of all, a king is a king for his whole life, but the president would be elected every 4 years. If people didn't like what the president was doing, they could vote for someone else. Second, a king is powerful because his word is law, but the president could not make laws. Only Congress could do that. Voting for the Constitution. In 1787 and 1788, the 13 states voted on the new Constitution. Delaware, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Georgia, Connecticut, Massachusetts, Maryland, South Carolina, New Hampshire voted yes, and the Constitution became the law of the land. Later, Virginia, New York, North Carolina, and Rhode Island also voted yes. George Washington became the first president of the United States of America. Thomas Jefferson said that Americans had created a new kind of government that would make it easier to solve problems through discussion and by voting. And so here we can see George Washington, who became the first president of America on April 30th, 1789. The first 10 amendments, Bill of Rights. After the Constitution was approved, James Madison went back home to Virginia and ran for Congress. He was elected and became one of the first things that he did was to work on a set of 10 amendments or changes to the Constitution. These amendments, known as the Bill of Rights, became a part of the Constitution in 1791. Bill of Rights ensured that people had freedom of speech, freedom to choose their religion, and freedom to assembly, as well to ensure that the press, the newspapers, would be able to do their work. Terms used. Elected is to be chosen by voting. Vote is to make a decision by marking choices on a piece of paper, called a ballot, by raising your hand or by saying your choices out loud. Often today, people also vote by using electronic voting machines. Congress is the group of people who make the laws for the United States. The people in Congress are elected by the people of each state. Law of the land refers to the set of rules that exist in a certain place in the United States. The Constitution is the most important set of rules for the country. Questions. What did James Madison, John Jay, and Alexander Hamilton want to explain to Americans, and why? They wanted to explain to Americans what the Constitution was supposed to do and how it worked. They believed that if people understood the Constitution, they would think it was good and they would vote for it. Madison, Jay, and Hamilton explained that the President of the United States could never become as powerful as a king. How did the men decide to teach people about the Constitution? They decided to teach people about the Constitution by writing a series of newspaper articles, which were later made into a book called the Federalist Papers. Based on the Constitution, what would the difference be between America's president and a king's ability to rule? A president would be elected every 4 years, while a king can rule for his whole life. Kings can make laws, but presidents would not be able to make laws. According to the US Constitution, who could make the laws in the United States? Only Congress could make laws. Delegates are elected to represent the interests of a United States territory and its citizens. A closer look at the Constitution. The writing of the Constitution was the first time in history when a group of people came together to give power to their government, while also limiting that power. At the time the Constitution was written, most countries were ruled by kings and queens. Before the US Constitution, the idea of government getting its power from the people was only an idea. Even today, more than 230 years later, Americans can go to Washington, D.C. and see the original signed Constitution on display at the National Archives building. Not only that, every library in the country has a copy of it. U.S. Constitution in the National Archives, Washington, D.C. We the people. Anyone who sees the US Constitution notices that the first 3 words are the biggest words on the page, we the people. This means that our government gets its power to make laws from the people, not from a king or a president. We the people means that we decide what the law should be, and no one can be above the law. We the people also means that it is up to us whether this is a country of good laws or bad laws. Amendments to the US Constitution. The Founding Fathers were a special group of men, but they were not perfect. The men who wrote the Constitution knew it would need to be changed in the future. If it were not possible to change the Constitution, to amend it, it would never have lasted until today. They wrote into the Constitution a system for changing it by adding amendments. The Constitution has been amended 27 times, and it was last changed in 1992. There have been amendments that ended slavery and that allowed women to vote. The US Constitution is far better now than it was when it was first written, and we the people can continue to improve it. Some people want to add to the Constitution. Some people wanted to add a Bill of Rights to the Constitution that guaranteed freedom of religion, freedom of speech, and freedom of the press. These are the 27 amendments that have been made over the past 200 years. The first 10 amendments to the Constitution are known as the Bill of Rights. The 13th Amendment occurred in 1865, and it brought about the abolition of slavery. The 15th Amendment occurred in 1870, and this is when African American men attained the right to vote. The 19th Amendment occurred in 1909, and this is when women attained their right to vote. Capital of America. Washington, D.C. is the capital city of the United States. It is where the president lives and works, and where Congress meets. National Archives Museum, Washington, D.C. The National Archives is where the United States government keeps its collection of documents about the government and history of the United States. The original signed Constitution is on display at the National Archives building in Washington, D.C. Also, every library in the country has a copy of the Constitution so that people can read it for themselves for free. Questions. According to the Constitution, who could make the laws in the United States? Only Congress could make the laws. Who became the first president of the United States of America? On April 30th, 1789, George Washington became the first president of the United States of America. In the end, what did the states decide to do? In the end, the states decided to vote to make the Constitution the law of the land. Where can the original signed copy of the Constitution be found? The original signed copy is on display at the National Archives building in Washington, D.C. What are the biggest words on the first page of the Constitution? The biggest words on the first page of the Constitution are, "We the people," which means that our government gets its power to make laws from the people and not from a king or president. What did the founding fathers know about the future of the Constitution? The founding fathers knew that their plan of government wasn't perfect and that a changing society in the future would require changes to the government. For this reason, the framers of the Constitution made it a living document. This allowed for the addition of laws to the Constitution to reflect changes in society. These additions and changes are what we call the amendments to the Constitution. What are the two important changes to American laws that were made through amendments to the Constitution? They were the amendments that ended slavery and allowed women to vote. Preamble of the U.S. Constitution. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. Preamble of the U.S. Constitution. Conclusions. The writing of the U.S. Constitution was held in Philadelphia in 1787 and was known as the Constitutional Convention. The founding fathers, James Madison, Benjamin Franklin, and George Washington, wanted to create a constitution because they wanted a new kind of government in which the people, not the president, had the power and were able to govern. James Madison is known as the father of the Constitution because of the work he did. The first three words of the Constitution are, "We the people," which means that our government gets its power to make laws from the people, not from a king or president. Democracy means to be run by the people and not the president. The government enforces laws, settles disputes, and protects people's rights and liberties. There are three branches of government: legislative, which make laws; judicial, which carry out the laws; and executive, which evaluate the laws. They govern one another through a check and balance system. Only Congress can make laws. Amendments enable people to make changes to the Constitution. James Madison made the first 10 amendments, known as the Bill of Rights, which give people freedom of speech, religion, and the ability to assemble. The U.S. Constitution is a document that states how the U.S. government is run. A delegate is a person chosen to represent the people. Thank you so much for listening and for being a part of learning all about the U.S. Constitution. I hope you have enjoyed it.